The ranch had always been the heart of our family, a place where time moved a little slower, and the chaos of the world seemed far away. As a child, I spent endless days wandering the fields, the golden grass brushing against my legs, and the steady rhythm of hooves echoing in the background. The ranch was our sanctuary, but as I grew older, I began to see the cracks forming not just in the buildings or fences, but in the foundation of our lives. My dad used to say that the ranch was more than a home. It was a legacy. But legacies don't pay bills, and when he left us, the weight of keeping that legacy alive fell squarely on my mom's shoulders. At first, she held it together, juggling the endless chores of ranch life while trying to make ends meet. But as the years passed, the signs of strain became impossible to ignore. The roof of the barn leaked whenever it rained, soaking the hay and creating a persistent damp smell that lingered in the air. The fences, once sturdy and whitewashed, sagged and cracked, barely holding together the fragile boundary between us and the open land. I could see it in my mom's eyes, the exhaustion that came from too many nights spent worrying over bills and too many mornings waking up before the sun to care for the horses. She tried to hide it from me, putting on a brave face, but the strain etched deep lines into her once bright expression. Her hands, calloused from years of work, trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. The ranch was her world, and she was determined to keep it alive, even as it seemed to crumble around her. For me, the ranch was a place of both comfort and unease. I loved the wide open spaces, the gentle nicker of the horses, and the way the setting sun bathed everything in golden light. But I couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that hung over us like a storm cloud. The unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter were a constant reminder of how close we were to losing everything. Every time I walked past the stack, I felt a pang of guilt that I couldn't do more to help, guilt that my mom was carrying this burden alone. The turning point came one evening as we sat at the kitchen table, the air heavy with unspoken worry. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall was the only thing breaking the silence. My mom stared at the pile of bills in front of her, her brow furrowed in concentration, as if she could will the numbers to change through sheer determination. I sat across from her, fidgeting with the edge of my notebook, unsure of what to say. Finally, she looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "We can't keep going like this," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Something has to change." I didn't know what to say. We had been barely scraping by for years, but hearing her admit it out loud made it feel even more real. The ranch, the place that had been our home for generations, was slipping through our fingers, and there didn't seem to be anything we could do to stop it. My mom reached into a drawer and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years, her old video camera. It was a relic from another time, scratched and slightly dented but still functional. She placed it on the table between us, her fingers lingering on it, as if it held some kind of power. "We need to do something unconventional," she said, her tone calm but resolute. "Something that will make people pay attention." I frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What kind of unconventional?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the camera. "People love animals," she said finally. "They love stories that make them feel something. And we have a story here, Star's story, our story. We just need to show them." Star was our most beloved horse, a chestnut stallion with a sleek coat and intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight into your soul. He had been with us since he was a foal, growing up alongside me, and he was as much a part of the family as anyone else. I couldn't argue with my mom's point. Star was special, and the bond we shared with him was undeniable. But the way she spoke about him, the intensity in her voice, made me uneasy. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my stomach twisting with apprehension. "Are you thinking about selling him?" Her eyes snapped to mine, wide with shock. "No, of course not. I could never do that." She reached across the table and placed a hand over mine. "This isn't about selling Star. It's about showing the world who he is, who we are. If we can make people see what this ranch means to us, maybe they'll help. Maybe they'll care." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken desperation. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she had a plan, but something about the way she avoided my gaze made me feel uneasy. It wasn't like her to keep secrets, but I could tell there was more she wasn't telling me. The next day, she brought me out to the barn and handed me the camera. The barn, with its familiar scent of hay and wood, felt different, somehow heavier, like it was holding its breath. Star stood in his stall, his dark eyes gleaming in the dim light. My mom ran her hand down his neck, her touch gentle and familiar. "This is how we save our home," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "Trust me." The weight of the camera in my hands felt like the weight of the world. I didn't know what she had in mind, but I could feel the pressure of her expectations bearing down on me. The ranch was our entire world, and if this was her plan to save it, how could I say no? I nodded, the words catching in my throat. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll do it." She smiled, a small, hopeful smile that almost made me believe everything would be okay. But as the barn doors creaked shut behind us, sealing us in with the dim light and the faint sound of stars breathing, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to cross a line we could never uncross. Star wasn't just a horse, he was family. From the moment he was born in our old stable, his arrival felt like a beacon of hope in our lives. He was a chestnut colt with legs too long for his body, and a white streak that ran down the center of his nose like a lightning bolt. I remember the way my mom held her breath as he stumbled to his feet for the first time, his tiny hooves wobbling under him, and how she exhaled with relief when he finally stood steady. It was like he carried the weight of our family's dreams from the start. Growing up, Star was always by my side. When I was a kid, he was the curious shadow following me through the fields, nuzzling at my pockets for hidden treats. As I grew older, our bond deepened into something unspoken, a connection I could feel in the way he would lower his head against my chest or follow my lead without question. He was more than a horse, he was a steady presence, a reminder of the quiet strength and resilience that life on the ranch required. There was something unique about Star, something that set him apart from the other horses. He had an intelligence in his eyes that felt almost human, a quiet understanding of the world around him. My mom always said he had an old soul, and I believed her. Star wasn't just aware of his surroundings, he seemed to be aware of us, of our emotions. On days when I felt overwhelmed or defeated, he'd stand close, pressing his warm muzzle into my palm as if to say, "I'm here." He had a way of grounding us, of making the ranch feel like more than just a piece of land. When things were tough, when the bills piled up, when the fences needed mending, when the sky seemed to stretch endlessly with no sign of relief, Star was a constant. His steady presence reminded us why we fought so hard to keep the ranch alive. He wasn't just an animal, he was a symbol of everything we were trying to hold on to. My mom's connection with Star was just as strong. She often said that he understood her better than anyone else, and watching them together, it was hard to argue. She could coax him into doing just about anything, her voice soft and steady, her touch firm but gentle. He trusted her completely, and that trust was something I both admired and envied. It was the kind of bond that couldn't be forced or faked. It was built over years of care and understanding. On the days when the weight of the ranch's struggles felt unbearable, my mom would saddle up Star and ride out into the fields. I'd watch from the porch as the two of them disappeared into the horizon, her figure silhouetted against the setting sun. When they returned, her shoulders were always a little less tense, her steps a little lighter. It was as if Star had taken some of her burden and carried it for her, if only for a while. But Star wasn't just there for the hard times, he was at the center of our happiest memories too. I remember the summer when the fields were lush and golden, and my mom and I spent the evenings teaching Star to navigate small obstacles we'd built from old barrels and wooden planks. It was a game for him, something he approached with a mix of curiosity and enthusiasm. Each time he cleared a hurdle, we'd cheer like he'd won a championship, and Star would toss his head as if he understood our pride. There was also the time he saved me. I had wandered too far into the woods behind the ranch, chasing a rabbit I'd seen darting through the trees. The sun was setting, and I quickly realized I had no idea how to find my way back. Panic set in as the woods grew darker, the shadows stretching long and ominous. I remember calling out for help, my voice shaky and small, when I heard the sound of hooves approaching. It was Star. He had followed my scent, finding me in the thick of the trees. He stood there, calm and steady, until I climbed onto his back. He carried me home, his step sure and unhurried, as if he knew exactly where we needed to go. That was Star, loyal, dependable, and unshakable. He wasn't just a horse, he was part of our family story. He represented everything we cherished about life on the ranch: the simplicity, the connection, the unspoken promise that no matter how hard things got, we'd always find a way through. When my mom came to me with the idea of using Star to create a video, I wasn't surprised. He had always been at the heart of our lives, so it made sense that she saw him as the key to saving the ranch. What surprised me was the intensity of her determination. She spoke about Star with a kind of reverence, as though he were more than just a beloved horse, but a beacon that could draw people to our story. "He's special," she said one evening as we stood in the barn, the soft glow of the lanterns casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. "People need to see that. They need to feel what we feel when we look at him." I understood what she meant, but it also made me uneasy. The thought of turning Star into a spectacle, of using our bond with him to gain attention, felt wrong somehow. He was more than a prop or a tool. He was Star, the horse who had carried us through so much. But as I looked at my mom, her face lined with exhaustion and hope, I couldn't bring myself to say no. The night we began filming, I stood in the barn with the camera in my hands, watching as my mom brushed Star's coat with deliberate care. He stood there quietly, his ears flicking back and forth, his trust in us unwavering. That trust was what made my stomach twist. He had no idea what we were doing, no idea that he was at the center of something far bigger than either of us had anticipated. "People need to see this," my mom said, her voice soft but firm. "They need to see what he means to us." I nodded, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. Star trusted us completely, and that trust was something fragile, something sacred. As I hit the record button and watched the red light blink to life, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a line. But Star stood steady, his dark eyes watching me with quiet assurance, as if to say, "It's okay. I'm here." That was Star, always there, always steady, always carrying us forward, even when we didn't deserve it. The ethical dilemma began to take root the moment my mother handed me the camera that night in the barn. At first, I didn't realize what was happening. I didn't see the weight of her decision or the line she was crossing, not until I found myself standing there, watching her craft a story that wasn't entirely true. The camera in my hands felt heavier with every passing second, and with it came a growing unease that I couldn't ignore. It started innocently enough. My mom's voice was warm and steady as she spoke into the camera, painting a picture of our family's bond with Star and the ranch's deep history. Her words were heartfelt, and for a moment I believed we were simply sharing our story. But then her tone shifted. She began talking about Star in a way that felt rehearsed, as though she was building up to something bigger. She described him as one of a kind, a horse with qualities no other animal could match. It wasn't a lie exactly. Star was special, but the way she said it felt exaggerated, designed to evoke a specific reaction. I glanced at Star, standing quietly in the dim light, his eyes following us with calm curiosity. He had no idea what was going on, no idea that he was being turned into the centerpiece of a narrative my mom had created. That was when the first pang of guilt hit me. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of doubt, but it grew stronger as I watched her manipulate the scene. She rearranged the hay bales for better lighting, adjusted her position to make her silhouette more dramatic, and even instructed me to angle the camera a certain way to capture the emotion. Her dedication was admirable, but it also felt wrong. This wasn't the mom I knew, the one who always told me to value honesty above all else, to never cut corners even when the world felt stacked against us. This version of her was different, driven by a desperation I'd never seen before. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to stop her. I told myself it was for the ranch, that it was just a small exaggeration, a tiny bending of the truth. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. As the filming continued, the tension between us grew. My mom was so focused on her vision that she barely noticed my discomfort. Her eyes sparkled with determination as she fed Star carrots and spoke about their unshakable bond, her words flowing like poetry. To anyone watching, it would have seemed genuine, but I could see the cracks beneath the surface. I could see how carefully she chose her words, how she avoided looking directly at me, as if afraid I might challenge her. When she turned to me and said, "Let's show them how much he trusts us," the knot in my stomach tightened. I asked her what she meant, but she brushed off my question, telling me to keep filming. That's when I realized she had a specific moment in mind, something she hadn't shared with me. The way she moved, the way she spoke, it all pointed to a plan she hadn't revealed. "Mom," I said, lowering the camera, "what are we doing here? What are you trying to show?" Her hands paused mid-stroke on Star's mane. For a moment I thought she might answer honestly, but then she shook her head and smiled, a strained expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "People need to see the truth," she said. "They need to understand what this ranch means to us, what Star means to us." Her words sounded noble, but there was something off about the way she said them. They felt too polished, too calculated, as if she were rehearsing a script. I pressed her again, my voice trembling. The truth. Or what you think people want to see? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to a small box she'd brought into the barn and pulled out a handful of props ribbons, a shiny halter, and a small flag. She began arranging them on Star, her movements quick and precise, as if she were putting the finishing touches on a masterpiece. It's not about lying, she said finally, her back to me. It's about storytelling. People need something to believe in, something real. That's what we're giving them. But it's not real, I said, my voice rising despite myself. You're staging this. You're making it into something it's not. She turned to face me, her expression hardening. And what's the alternative? Do nothing? Watch this place fall apart while we cling to our so-called integrity. We don't have that luxury. Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because there was truth in them. The ranch was falling apart. The bills weren't going away. And yet, the idea of creating a fake moment, of turning Star into a spectacle, felt like a betrayal of him, of ourselves, of everything the ranch stood for. I hesitated, my grip tightening on the camera. Mom, this isn't right. Star trusts us. We can't use him like this. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, she looked like the mom I remembered. You think I don't know that? She said quietly. You think this is easy for me, but I'm out of options. If we don't do this, we lose everything. I wanted to argue, to tell her there had to be another way, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't just desperate, she was afraid. Afraid of losing the ranch, of losing the life we'd built, of losing the part of herself that was tied to this land. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about the ranch for her. It was about survival. The ethical dilemma didn't end there. It stayed with me long after we finished filming, lingering in the back of my mind like a shadow. Even as I helped her edit the footage, piecing together the narrative she wanted to share, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were doing something wrong. The video was beautiful, heartfelt, and moving, but it wasn't entirely honest. It wasn't the truth. As the video began to take shape, so did my guilt. I couldn't help but wonder what Star would think if he understood what we were doing. He trusted us implicitly, and we were using that trust to manipulate people into caring about our story. It felt like a betrayal, not just of him, but of everything he represented. And yet, I didn't stop. I told myself it was for the greater good, that the ends justified the means. But deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. The ethical dilemma wasn't just about right or wrong, it was about who we were and who we wanted to be. And as much as I wanted to believe we were doing the right thing, I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of my mind that told me otherwise. The air in the barn felt heavy, as though it were holding its breath along with the rest of us. Star stood in the center of the space, his sleek coat gleaming under the dim light, his ears flicking nervously at every sound. The tension in the room was palpable, a taut wire stretched to its limit. My mom moved with a calm deliberation that belied the storm brewing inside her. She adjusted the camera on its tripod, stepping back to check the angle, her every motion precise and focused. Almost there, she murmured, more to herself than to me. I stood off to the side, the handheld camera clutched tightly in my sweaty palms. My heart pounded as I tried to shake the feeling that we were playing with fire. The scene felt wrong, staged in a way that made me uncomfortable, as though we were crossing an invisible line we'd never be able to retreat from. Star, our beloved horse, wasn't just the star of this show. He was the unwitting cornerstone of a desperate gamble. Mom, I said, my voice breaking the stillness. Are you sure about this? She turned to me, her eyes blazing with a determination that sent a chill down my spine. We've talked about this, she said firmly. This is our chance. We just need to show the world what Star means to us. Her words were meant to reassure me, but they only made the knot in my stomach tighten. I glanced at Star, who was pawing the ground now, his restlessness growing. He wasn't used to this kind of energy, the lights, the cameras, the tension thick in the air. His trust in us was unwavering, but I could see the flickers of unease in his eyes, a subtle sign that he was reaching his limit. We should stop, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. This doesn't feel right. My mom froze for a moment, her hands still on the camera's adjustments. Then she straightened, turning to face me fully. This is all we have left, she said, her voice quieter now but no less intense. If we stop now, what's the alternative? Watch the ranch fall apart? Lose Star? I can't let that happen. Before I could argue, she moved towards Star, her voice soft and soothing as she stroked his neck. It's okay, boy, she whispered. Just a little longer. Trust me. Star snorted, his nostrils flaring as he shifted his weight from one hoof to another. The barn felt suffocating, the shadows from the overhead lights stretching long and eerie across the floor. I swallowed hard, raising the camera again, despite the unease clawing at my chest. The record light blinked, a silent witness to everything unfolding. Let's show them the bond, my mom said, her voice suddenly bright with forced cheer. Show them what makes us special. She guided Star toward the center of the barn, the soft creak of the wooden floorboards punctuating the silence. Her movements were steady, confident, as though she could will the tension away by sheer force of determination. But Star was growing more agitated. His ears pinned back slightly, his tail swished sharply, and his movements became jittery. I could feel his unease like a tangible thing, a ripple in the air that set my own nerves on edge. And then it happened. A sudden loud crack echoed through the barn, sharp and jarring. Star froze, his muscles tensing, his head snapping up. His eyes darted wildly, searching for the source of the noise. It had come from the rafters, where the old wooden beams had borne the weight of time and neglect for far too long. One of them had splintered, the crack running jagged like a scar, and it groaned ominously under the strain. Mom, I said, my voice trembling, we need to stop. Now. She looked up, following my gaze to the fractured beam. Her eyes widened, but her body remained still, as though frozen by indecision. Star, however, had reached his limit. He reared back suddenly, his front hooves slicing the air as he let out a loud, piercing whinny. The sound sent shivers down my spine. Star, easy, my mom shouted, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The barn erupted into chaos. Star bucked wildly, his powerful hooves crashing against the floor as he fought to escape the suffocating tension. The tripod toppled over, the camera clattering to the ground with a metallic thud. The barn seemed to come alive, the shadows leaping and twisting with every frantic movement. My mom stumbled backward, her arms raised in a futile attempt to calm Star down. Get out of the way, I yelled, my voice cracking as adrenaline surged through me. I dropped the camera and rushed toward her, my instincts taking over. Above us, the fractured beam let out another groan, the sound deep and foreboding. I looked up just in time to see the crack widening, the wood splintering as it began to buckle. Dust and debris rained down, and the entire barn seemed to hold its breath for one excruciating moment before the beam gave way. Move, I shouted, grabbing my mom by the arm and pulling her back just as the beam came crashing down. It hit the ground with a deafening thud, sending up a cloud of dust and scattering splinters in every direction. The impact shook the entire barn, the vibrations reverberating through my body. Star bolted, his instincts for survival overriding everything else. He charged toward the open barn doors, his powerful strides carrying him out into the night. I watched him go, relief flooding through me that he was unharmed. But the chaos wasn't over. The barn groaned around us, the remaining beams creaking under the strain of the collapse. My mom and I stood frozen, the dust settling around us as the enormity of what had just happened sank in. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at the fallen beam. Are you okay? I asked, my voice trembling as I gripped her arm. She nodded slowly, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. I'm fine, she whispered, though her voice was shaky. I didn't realize. Her words trailed off as she looked around the barn, taking in the destruction. The camera lay on the ground, its lens cracked but still intact. The lights overhead flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows across the chaos. Outside, I could hear Star pacing in the paddock, his hooves striking the ground as he worked through his panic. The cool night air beckoned, and I guided my mom out of the barn, both of us gasping for fresh air. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint creak of settling wood behind us. That could have killed us, I said, my voice trembling with both fear and anger. Was it worth it, Mom? Was any of this worth it? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at the camera still clutched in her hands, her expression a mix of guilt and despair. Finally, she shook her head, her voice barely audible. No, she said, you're right. I lost sight of what really matters. I wanted to be angry, to shout at her for pushing us to the brink, but all I felt was an overwhelming sense of relief that we were still standing. The barn could be repaired, and the ranch could survive, but what mattered most was that we were okay. As I looked toward the paddock, where Star's silhouette moved against the moonlit sky, I couldn't help but feel grateful. He had been at the center of this chaos, but he had also reminded us of what truly mattered: trust, connection, and the strength to face whatever came next. The barn stood silent in the aftermath, its stillness almost eerie. The chaos of moments earlier, the panic, the noise, the crashing beam had subsided, leaving only the faint creak of settling wood and the distant sound of Star's restless pacing outside. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the now damaged roof, and I felt my breath catch as I took in the wreckage around us. My mom stood next to me, her face pale, her breathing shaky. The barn had always been a sanctuary for us, a place filled with warmth and life. Now it felt like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the tension. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded weakly, but her eyes were fixed on the fallen beam that lay at our feet. It had missed her by only inches, and the reality of how close we had come to disaster was still sinking in. I moved to pick up the camera I had dropped during the chaos. The lens was covered in dust, but it was still intact. I brushed it off, but something else caught my eye, something glinting faintly in the beam of light coming through the cracked roof. It was embedded in the fallen wood, barely visible among the splinters and debris. "What's that?" my mom asked, her voice soft and hesitant, as though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "I don't know," I replied, kneeling to get a closer look. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, rough with rust. I worked it free carefully, my heart racing as I pulled a small, heavy metal box from the wood. The edges were corroded, and the hinges looked like they hadn't been opened in decades. We exchanged a glance, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. The box felt significant, as if it had been waiting all these years to be discovered. "Open it," my mom urged, her voice trembling with equal parts fear and curiosity. My hands shook as I pried at the rusted lid. It resisted at first, the metal groaning in protest, but finally it gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, wrapped in a piece of aged, brittle fabric, was a bundle of papers. I carefully lifted them out, feeling the weight of history in my hands. The papers were yellowed with age, their edges frayed, and they smelled faintly of earth and time. "What are they?" my mom asked, leaning closer. I unfolded the first page, my eyes scanning the handwritten words. It was a letter, the ink faded but still legible. The words were addressed to someone named Sarah, and they spoke of hope, resilience, and a deep love for the land. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized the name. Sarah had been my great-grandmother, the woman who had first worked this ranch with her husband. These weren't just any papers, they were part of our family's history. "There's more," I said, pulling out another document. It was a land deed, detailing the original purchase of the ranch. The handwriting was bold and confident, a testament to the determination of the people who had built this place from nothing. My mom's hands trembled as she reached out to touch it, her eyes filling with tears. But it was the last item in the box that took our breath away. Tucked at the bottom, beneath the letters and the deed, was a map. It was hand-drawn, the lines precise but clearly aged. It showed the ranch as it must have looked decades ago, with neat little notations marking important spots. But what stood out most was the large X drawn just beyond the paddock, accompanied by a single word written in bold letters: legacy. "What does it mean?" my mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, my mind racing. "But I think we need to find out." The word legacy felt heavy with significance. It wasn't just a mark on a map, it was a promise, a clue left by the people who had come before us. My mom and I stared at each other, the realization sinking in. The ranch wasn't just land to be worked or a place to call home. It was part of something much bigger, something we had barely begun to understand. The next morning we stood in the paddock, the map clutched tightly in my mom's hands. The spot marked with the X wasn't far, but the anticipation made the distance feel immense. We carried shovels, our breaths visible in the crisp morning air. Star stood nearby, his calm presence a steadying force as we began to dig. At first it was just dirt and rocks, the repetitive motion of digging grounding us in the task at hand. But then, My mom's shovel struck something solid. We froze, exchanging a look of cautious excitement before digging faster, our hands working in tandem to uncover whatever lay beneath the surface. It was a chest, its wood dark and worn with age. The metal fittings were tarnished but intact, and the weight of it as we lifted it from the ground made it clear that it held more than just air. My mom knelt beside it, her hands trembling as she opened the lid. Inside were more documents, each one a piece of the ranch's history. There were letters from my great-grandparents, detailing their struggles and triumphs as they built the ranch from the ground up. There were photographs, sepia-toned and faded, capturing moments of joy and hard work. But there was more objects that told stories of their own. A pocket watch, its face cracked but still ticking faintly. A leather-bound journal, its pages filled with sketches and notes about the land. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was a gold locket engraved with the initials SH. "This is incredible," my mom whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It's like they left this here for us to find." I nodded, unable to speak. The discovery was overwhelming, not just because of what it meant for our family's history, but because of what it could mean for the ranch's future. These items weren't just relics, they were proof of the ranch's importance, of its place in our community's story. Over the next few weeks, word of our discovery spread. Historians came to visit, fascinated by the documents and artifacts we had unearthed. Local sponsors offered to help preserve the ranch, recognizing its historical significance. Slowly, the weight that had hung over us for so long began to lift. Looking back, I realized that the night in the barn had been a turning point. The chaos and danger had forced us to confront what truly mattered, not the views, not the money, but the legacy we were part of. The ranch wasn't just a place. It was a story, one that we had nearly forgotten but were finally ready to share with the world. And in that story, Star was more than just a horse, he was a symbol of everything we were fighting for, the bond that had kept us together through it all. The days after our discovery in the barn felt like waking up from a long, restless dream. The heavy weight of despair that had hung over the ranch for years began to ease, replaced by something we hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The chest we unearthed wasn't just a collection of old papers and trinkets, it was a lifeline, a reminder of who we were and where we came from. It gave us a story to tell, one that was far richer and more meaningful than the contrived narrative we had tried to create in desperation. At first, we didn't know where to start. The documents and artifacts from the chest were delicate, some on the verge of disintegration. My mom spent hours at the kitchen table, carefully cataloging each piece, her hands moving with a steadiness I hadn't seen in years. Letters, maps, sketches, each one told a piece of the story of the ranch, of our family, of the sacrifices and dreams that had built this place from the ground up. She read them aloud to me sometimes, her voice soft and full of reverence. "This one's from your great-grandmother," she said one evening, holding up a faded letter. The edges were frayed, the ink smudged in places, but the words were still legible. She was writing to her sister about the first winter they spent here. "Listen to this. The cold here bites harder than I expected, but there's a beauty to it, too. I watch the snow settle on the hills, and I know we've made the right choice. This land will carry us forward." The words lingered in the air, their weight sinking into me. I pictured her sitting at a wooden table by a dim lamp, writing those words with frozen fingers, her heart full of both fear and determination. It was a stark reminder that our struggles weren't new, they were part of a long line of challenges that our family had faced and overcome. The discovery didn't just reconnect us with our past, it gave us a way to move forward. My mom reached out to a local historian, who was immediately intrigued by what we had found. He visited the ranch, his eyes lighting up as he sifted through the chest's contents. "This is remarkable," he said, holding up the hand-drawn map we had found. "It's a window into a world that's long gone. People will want to hear this story." He wasn't wrong. Word spread quickly, and soon the ranch became the center of attention in our small community. Journalists came to interview us, their cameras capturing the weathered charm of the barn, the fields stretching out to the horizon, and of course Star. He became a symbol of the ranch's resilience, his calm, steady presence reminding everyone of the bond between humans and animals, and the strength that comes from trust. The attention brought opportunities we hadn't expected. A preservation society offered funding to restore the barn, recognizing its historical significance. Local businesses pitched in, donating materials and labor to repair the fences, fix the roof, and repaint the house. Even the bills that had once seemed insurmountable began to shrink as sponsors and supporters rallied around us. Through it all, my mom changed in ways I hadn't thought possible. The desperation that had driven her to the edge melted away, replaced by a quiet strength. She smiled more, laughed more, and even allowed herself to dream again. She stopped seeing the ranch as a burden and started seeing it as a gift, something worth fighting for, not just out of necessity, but out of love. One evening, after the last of the restoration work was done and the barn stood proud and sturdy once more, my mom and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. The fields were bathed in golden light, the kind that made everything feel timeless. "I almost lost sight of what really mattered," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I was so focused on saving the ranch that I forgot why it was worth saving in the first place." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a tenderness I hadn't seen in a long time. "Thank you for sticking with me," she said, "even when I didn't deserve it." "You've always deserved it," I replied. "We're in this together." She smiled, a small, quiet smile that spoke volumes. For the first time in years, I felt like we were truly a team again. But the story didn't end there. The ranch became more than just a home. It became a place where people came to connect with the past, to learn about the lives of those who had come before. We started hosting events, inviting schools to visit and learn about the history of the land and the family that built it. My mom led tours, her voice steady and passionate as she recounted stories we had uncovered from the chest, tales of resilience, love, and the unyielding determination of our ancestors. She spoke about the brutal winters, the droughts, and the sacrifices that had been made to keep the ranch alive through generations. Each story was told with reverence, each one a reminder of the strength that had carried us this far. Star, as always, became the center of attention during these events. Visitors marveled at him, drawn to his calm demeanor and the undeniable intelligence in his eyes. Children crowded around him, their small hands reaching out to stroke his sleek coat, while my mom explained how he represented the heart of the ranch. "Star isn't just a horse," she would say, her voice warm and full of pride. "He's a part of our family, just like this ranch is a part of our story. Everything we do here is about honoring that bond between us, the animals, and the land." People connected with that message. They felt it in the way Star nuzzled my mom's hand or followed me around the paddock, his trust in us unwavering. They saw it in the barn restored to its former glory, and in the fields that stretched endlessly, shimmering in the sunlight. The ranch became a living, breathing testament to the power of legacy and the bonds that hold us together. For me, the transformation wasn't just about the ranch, it was about my relationship with my mom. The desperation and tension that had driven a wedge between us dissolved as we worked side by side to rebuild our home. We had faced the brink of collapse together and come out stronger, our bond forged anew in the fires of our shared struggle. One day, as we sorted through the last of the documents from the chest, I came across an entry in the leather-bound journal we had found. It was written by my great-great-grandfather, and the words struck me deeply. "This land isn't ours to own, it's ours to care for, to protect, to pass on. It's a part of us, and we are a part of it. As long as we remember that, we'll never lose our way." I showed it to my mom, and we sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of those words settling over us. It was as if he had written them for us, knowing that someday we would need to be reminded of why this place mattered. From that point on, everything we did was guided by those words. The ranch wasn't just a piece of land to us anymore, it was a responsibility, a privilege, and a promise. We began documenting its history, creating an archive of the stories and artifacts we had uncovered. We worked with local historians to ensure that the ranch would be preserved not just for us, but for future generations. In time, the financial struggles that had once consumed us faded into the background. The ranch's newfound reputation as a historical site brought in enough support to keep it thriving. But more than that, it brought a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. The ranch wasn't just saved, it was reborn. On the anniversary of the day we found the chest, my mom and I stood by the paddock, watching Star graze in the golden light of the setting sun. The fields stretched out before us, as vast and timeless as they had always been. "We did it," my mom said softly, her voice full of gratitude. "We really did it." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "We did it together." She reached out and took my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt like everything was exactly as it should be. The ranch was more than just our home, it was our legacy. And now it was something we could be proud of again.